Sports.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to F1 in Review, episode 4. Today I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallagher once again to talk about the next 4 races in this series. To start with, we're going to be starting with Belgium and with Spa. So for those who are unaware, we go on to qualifying where Hamilton was first, Vettel was second, and Esteban Ocon in a surprising third. The results however changed, and it's Sebastian Vettel who won the race, then it was Hamilton and Verstappen who finished third place. Fernando Alonso, Nico Hülkenberg and Charles Leclerc were uninjured after the German Nico Hülkenberg rammed Alonso's McLaren and launched it over Leclerc's Sauber. Hülkenberg received a 10-place grid penalty at the next race for this incident. Alonso related it to the first lap crash in the race of 2012, in which the Lotus driver Romain Grosjean was given a racing ban for a similar incident, which also took the Spaniard out. So in light of this horrible incident, do you think that Hülkenberg has received comparatively less scrutiny than Romain Grosjean for his crash in 2012, or is it roughly the same?
Honestly, a lot less scrutiny. So if you think back to 2012, Grosjean that year had a bunch of incidents on the first lap. So I think it was up to Spa in that year, which was the 13th race of the season. There had been 12 races and he'd been involved in a first lap incident in 7 of them. So he already had like a reputation for causing crashes on the first lap. Some of them he got away with. For example, in Spain that year he had punctured someone's tyre, but his front wing had been mildly broken. Some races he'd crashed out the race completely. For example, Australia. So back then also I think it was his first full season. So you could arguably say, rightly so, the scrutiny was on him. They were saying, "Oh, should he actually be an F1 driver if he's this likely to cause collisions?" With Hülkenberg, scrutiny was a lot less. I'd say, from what I remember after the race, it moved on quite quickly. It was a big accident and it deserved to receive some scrutiny, and the penalty Hülkenberg received was deserved. But with Hülkenberg being a more experienced driver, I think people almost passed off as just a mistake, Again, admittedly, it was a big mistake because he managed to take 3 drivers out of the race. Alonso literally flew over Leclerc's car. But I'd say, a lot of scrutiny because Hülkenberg has been in the sport since 2010, a lot more experienced driver. So I think people could easily pass it off as a mistake and sort of say, oh, it's a one-time thing. Like, he doesn't make these. He's usually a reliable, solid, consistent driver who doesn't make anything near these kind of mistakes. So I think people were very easily able to pass it off, to be honest.
Yeah, so this was a really interesting crash because it was also really the first time that people stopped questioning this big bar that went across the new systems that come into place to protect the drivers' heads.
Indeed, yeah.
And before this, there was the controversy about how, whether or not it ruined the design of the car and it was going to be aerodynamically problematic and stuff like that. However, the Halo system after this, I think actually sort of got its name and people understood its purpose because you clearly in the footage you saw that Alonso went over the heads and impacted on top of another car. I can't remember which car he impacted, but he did hit another car though, and the Halo system did take that sort of force, which was good. It's a good thing to come out of these crashes. It's a bit of a shame really that you have to have an accident before people accept that their change is good. However, the problem with penalties is whatever happens, people don't like it. If you give someone a racing ban, people say, well, that's too harsh. We've had accidents like that before. You cram a whole lot of really fast cars into a tiny corner, especially as what Spa's like, everyone's charging down from the get-go. Then you're going to have an accident, and 3 into 1 don't go, as David Coulthard often says. And so this is the problem. He did, bear in mind, Hülkenberg crashed out the race. That's it. It was over for him. So if you gave him a racing ban, you're basically giving him a ban twice, because he effectively gave himself a ban on the first race because he didn't get any points, and you chuck him out again, and say right, you can't race again. Well, then you start getting to the point where he's trying to scramble for points now, and I don't think it's fair on Renault. And that's the other thing you got to remember. It impacts the team as well. There are thousands of people behind each car, working on this car, making sure it's ready, fit for purpose, and R&D. And Hülkenberg crashed out. he's going to go back to Renault, and they aren't going to be happy with him. They're not going to be like, oh, don't worry about it, sit down. No, they will have words with him, and they will put it in no uncertain terms that they can drop him. So, I think to some extent the stewards know this, and so don't necessarily always punish them themselves because it's not appropriate. They gave him a 10 place, right?
That's right.
I mean, that's enough to set you back in the grid. That's you have the chance to get a few points back, but 10 points behind, 10 places behind is a lot. And even if he qualified, second or third, he's not going to get first in a Renault. But if he qualifies second or third, I mean, he's still going to be 12th and 13th. That's a horrendous place to be trying to get back into it. So, effectively, they chucked him to the back of the grid on the next race, and which was fair. I think that was the most appropriate. I think the FIA have certainly got wiser, and the stewards have definitely got wiser as time gone on. Not being too extreme with the penalties and being appropriate, because this is the problem, right? You go extreme now, then you have to make sure that every single penalty reflects your initial, that bar you set. So by being relatively lenient, it gives themselves a scope to be both kinder and more harsh in the future without too much scrutiny.
So if you touched upon there, Tristan, we've talked about the Halo system before. There has been the debate regarding this. Should it be there? Should it not be there? Is it advantageous? Is it a hindrance? But do you think ultimately that this crash between Alonso and Leclerc, which is incredibly dangerous and violent, ultimately the Halo system has saved Charles Leclerc's life? Let's not get away from this. Do you think, therefore, the Halo argument has effectively been put to bed?
I'd say so. Yeah. I mean, obviously, it can't be. You'll never be able to find a piece of head protection device which is absolutely perfect when it comes to Formula One cars. And I remember a lot of people when the Halo first came in. There was a very big argument to say that it looked ugly, it wasn't aesthetically pleasing, and that's why people wanted to have a lot of people preferred a screen in front of the drivers instead. But they did tests. The screen was less safe whilst it looked better, and I'll admit it does look pretty cool. The Halo is safer. Basically, the thing is, before this crash as well, there was one other incident in a Formula 2 race in Spain early in the year, where one driver went for a dive up the inside, tried to overtake his rival, and they touched wheels, and the guy who was going up the inside got launched over their rival's car. The left rear wheel, I believe, clipped the Halo, and that was another incident where arguably it saved the driver's life, because without the Halo there's just a driver exposed to all the elements that are around him, and the wheel would have hit his helmet. So I'd say that's two clear-cut instances in motor racing this year where the Halo has saved someone's life. We saw after the horrific fatal crash of Jules Bianchi in 2014 that there was a need for head protection. There'd been many close calls in the years before that. For example, to be honest, in the exact same corner and involving the exact same driver in Alonso in Spa in 2012, where Grosjean got launched over Alonso's car, very ridiculously close to taking out Alonso's head, to be honest. So there's been many close calls in recent years, and there's been several cases where on commentary you get the commentator saying, thank God there was a Halo there, or in previous years, imagine if there was head protection. So I'd say, yeah. The thing is also, with the Formula 2 crash, the fact it happened, unfortunately, Tristan was saying earlier about how it needs a crash for people to see the effect it has. With the Formula 2 crash, people would still go, it's just a Formula 2 crash. At Formula 1, the same thing wouldn't happen. But the fact that it actually happened in a Formula 1 race, also one of the most popular races of the season in Belgium, I do think it puts the argument to bed, because people now see that it works. And also, in terms of the aesthetic element, people have got used to it. You speak to Formula 1 fans, and it's almost like they it was basically like at the start of the season, the Halo was noticeable because it stood out, but now you're so used to watching it and they're used to it, and the fact its safety element has been proven to be has proven it can work. I'd say the argument has been pretty much put to bed. I'd say that you can't really argue that it's a very good thing for Formula One.
Yeah, exactly, and you're exactly right there. Advocates of safety changes, people like Jackie Stewart back in the day, went through exactly the same thing, saying actually we need to have these barriers, we need to have these, clear guides, and even fire extinguishers on the side to make sure that we reduce the amount of deaths. And it seems like we have all these problems with exposed canopies, and no one wants a closed canopy. That's fair enough, I can see that. So you've got to have a halfway house. And if you remember, there have been some tragic accidents. People like John Surtees' son, who I think got hit on the head by a tyre, which killed him. And that was a horrendous tragedy, and it wasn't enough for people to say, actually, we probably should have some head protection. And it's not the first time Formula One cars have been ugly, and I don't think the Halo system is ugly. If you go back to 2014 and see the monstrosities, which are the noses of the cars like Caterham, it's appalling. And the FIA have actually said that they are prioritising pretty cars over fast cars, and I think that's fair enough. But what I would say in response to that is you cannot prioritise pretty cars over safe cars, because we are in a situation now where it is not acceptable to have a death a year in Formula 1, Formula 2 or the other Formula categories. It's not acceptable to put drivers in that position. Doesn't matter how much you're paying them. And some people would argue, well, that means the sport's less, and and air quoting here, manly or whatever. And I think those people have to get over it. Right, put them in a situation where they're doing hundreds of miles an hour behind another car. Some of the cases there's only half a second between them. The braking points have to be perfect. The acceleration has to be perfect. Everything has to go perfect. And what this means is there's a level of redundancy there. For the first time, actually, not everything has to go perfectly for the drivers to be safe. Right, if a tyre comes off the car in front, you have to be extremely lucky that it doesn't hit you in the head, or extremely unlucky that it does. But now, this Halo system means that if a tyre comes off, and you are unlucky enough for it to come directly towards your helmet, it's going to bounce off this big titanium, front, and save you. Or if your car flips upside down, it could save you. Do you remember that crash of Alonso flipping over from on the corner of, I can't remember if he flipped over, but he slammed into the ground upside down. He actually managed to tuck himself under. And these sort of safety things there means there's redundancies for that. And there always has to be redundancies. So yes, I do think it puts the argument to bed. And I wouldn't be surprised if more safety features came in soon.
Do you think there's any way that the Halo system can be adapted to please all? As we said, you've got the critics that say it look ugly, and then you've got the safety fanatics, which are rightly saying, the pros of it outweigh any cons. Do you think we can reach a situation where we can please all, or is that just impossible?
I'd say the only way to do it is just to keep on researching, keep on trying to find. I mean, the FIA, the F1 governing body, do this anyway. They're always trying to find the next steps to improve safety, enhance it, not just on the cars but also around the tracks with like the marshals, actual like track layouts, etc. They're always on the ball, trying to almost cut out any small. The thing is, you don't want to cut out too much, because F1 should be the danger elements of F1 should be like more of a thrill. If you completely and utterly get rid of all like possible, like if you try and get rid of all dangers around the sport, then it just becomes boring. It's just several cars going around a very neutralized environment. So you do need to have like the possibility for stuff to go wrong, as long as it doesn't harm the drivers or anyone around the track. The possibility for it to go wrong, for something extraordinary to happen. But in terms of head protection, like I said, just keep on trying to improve that aspect as well. Because the Halo, it's worked out very well, but as much as the crash with Alonso and Leclerc and Hulkenberg proved that it can work, at the same time, there may be an incident in the future where not necessarily someone is killed or injured, but there might be another close shave, and they might have to go away and say, okay, we'll have to improve that aspect as well, because no safety feature will be completely no safety feature will protect the drivers completely. It's at the end of the day, it's about finding the solution which can sort of do the least amount of harm, to be honest, because there will always be that element, there'll always be that element which might harm the drivers, and you've just got to hope that they can find the solution which is the best possible one. You can't eliminate all elements of danger, so you just got to keep on improving. But for now, the Halo is the best solution for sure.
Well, the Halo system might well get smaller. The hand system, which basically straps across the back of the helmet on F1 driver's helmet, and it basically absorbs the impacts when if you have a crash, and basically prevents whiplash. That if started out really tall and really high behind the driver's helmets, people criticise that for being ridiculous and looking awful. However, it's proven its usefulness, or rather, there's not been a serious neck injury or horrendously serious neck injury. So that's been fantastic, and that's got much smaller. It's not very noticeable. Most people don't actually really know what it is or what it does or even what it looks like. And the Halo system might well go that way. We could have a smaller, more dynamic Halo system. However, what they've been doing is utilising it. We had that embarrassing moment of the beginning of last year where people mounted the cameras in the usual place, and when we watched the onboard, you could just see this big, Halo system in your way, and you're like, for goodness sake, that's a silly thing. But then, of course, with that space in front of you, they actually then mounted the cameras to that, giving you a better perspective. They also overlaid graphics upon it, and you now get the braking and acceleration and the gear changing live feed there. So it's just a platform now, really, for safety, but also for the consumer, the average watcher, and so you can see it's much more dynamic. It might well get smaller, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did, especially the front one. I don't think the sidebars will get much smaller, only because they need to prevent large things getting through from the side. But the front one might well get smaller or thinner with new materials in order to, with the same amount of strength, just to give the drivers a new visual. But when the drivers don't really complain about something, I think it'll be fine. The FIA are gonna stick with it, and you can't please everyone. Old-fashioned people who have never put themselves in that sort of situation, I don't think are the priority here. The new fans don't mind it. I don't mind it. I think it's great. I'm up for more safety. And you're right, actually, the thrill is exactly what we're after. That's why everyone likes the crashes. But we like the crashes to be a little bit more safe, I think.
Sure. So moving on to Italy, qualifying was Kimi Räikkönen first, Vettel in second, and Lewis Hamilton in third. But the results were radically different and poor for Ferrari. He finished with Lewis Hamilton in first, Bottas in second, and Kimi Räikkönen falling to third place. Now, as I mentioned before, it was a 1-2 for Ferrari, and they surely had this one in the bag at their home circuit, but ultimately this didn't work out. Now, who is to blame for this, though? Was it Ferrari and the garage for pitting Kimi Räikkönen on lap 20 and leaving him with old tyres at the peril of a charging Hamilton? Or was it Vettel just being, once again, far too aggressive with Hamilton in the early laps, resulting in him spinning, breaking his front left wing, and recovering to a mere fourth place? What do we think?
Well, whatever way you spin this, it's a disastrous result for Ferrari. They had the fastest car at their home race, and you'd think, okay, well that's a perfect scenario to get a 1-2 and get good championship points, close the gap on Hamilton. But you mentioned those two things. You mentioned pitting for Raikkonen too early, and then Vettel being too aggressive. For me, honestly, the turning point was on Saturday, where for some weird... So, in Formula 1, it's normal on circuits with long straights, for example, like Monza in Italy, for teams to rotate their drivers and rotate the laps they get, so that one driver has a slipstream for one lap, and to make it more advantageous, to try and get greater speed on the straights and therefore a fastest lap, and then they'll switch turns for the final lap of the session. For some inexplicable reason, they gave Raikkonen the toe on the final lap of the session. So when everyone's charging towards the line, Raikkonen was the last man over the line, and he could get pole position. Admittedly, it was the fastest lap in F1 history, which is very impressive. But especially for a team such as Ferrari, where there's such a clear number one, number two driver hierarchy, it makes no sense that they let Raikkonen have the final lap, the chance to get the fastest lap of all. And then leading on to Sunday, getting into turn one, Raikkonen takes the lead. Vettel gets overtaken by Hamilton at the start. He's crouched in behind him, and Vettel's thinking, "Oh my God, I've got to get past my championship rival, but I haven't got my teammate to help out because he's focusing on trying to keep the lead." And then Vettel tries to go around the outside, and he spins. And honestly, this could all have been avoided had they swapped the order around at the end of qualifying, let Vettel, their number one driver and their championship contender, have the toe at the most advantageous time, and he would have been the lead. Arguably, would have avoided the troubles at the first corner. Would have been Vettel followed by Raikkonen. Raikkonen might have got overtaken by Hamilton, admittedly, because Hamilton's a more superior driver, but it would have been a Ferrari at least 1-3, possibly a 1-2. Instead, what you got, Vettel got spun all the way down to fourth, all the way down to last after his original spin, and then he only recovered to fourth, whilst Hamilton drove a fantastic race, in my opinion. Admittedly, Raikkonen did pit too early, and Hamilton definitely left it a few more laps after that because they knew that there'd be definitely more of an advantage. But Hamilton still had to stay in touch with the fastest car on the grid. The Mercedes that weekend was that was a period in the season where the Ferrari was the fastest car, and that was exaggerated at Monza because they were a bit faster than Mercedes than normal, and Hamilton managed to catch and pass him, and before you know it, Hamilton has 25 points, Vettel only has 12. Could have been the other way around, arguably. So I think Ferrari, in general, they had the fastest car, but they had a shocker of a weekend. Several mistakes from both strategists, from drivers. It didn't go well at all. For me, the turning point definitely was Saturday with qualifying. Should have given Vettel the tow, the slipstream rather. They failed to realise that. They failed to grasp the situation and give their main driver the most advantageous situation.
Ooh, I don't know the way you blame Ferrari for Vettel being what's the word, overly aggressive and just reckless actually. Now Ferrari weren't to know that Vettel was going to spin, and he was in the wrong. He overcharged and tapped side of Hamilton and spun. He came out of it badly. That was not the first time that happened in the season. Look at the incident with Verstappen. And Vettel is the number one driver in Ferrari. However, Raikkonen was just so much better. As you rightly said, he set a 1:19.1 around Monza, which is insanely fast. That's ridiculously quick. And Ferrari weren't going to hold back Raikkonen when they can secure constructors points. And I think what Ferrari were thinking was actually, if we put Raikkonen behind Vettel, then we'll have a faster driver who's being held up by a slower driver who's trying to hold up Hamilton. And we know from experience that Raikkonen can't hold Hamilton for long. And so I think Ferrari's plan was let Raikkonen do his flying fin thing. Let him go. Let him be him. This is the one opportunity he's got because many other opportunities. Let Vettel and Hamilton battle it out. Remember, all Vettel needs to do is not let Hamilton pass.
Yeah.
If he was in the lead, he would have to. It could well have been different. But again, you've got Raikkonen behind you, who's also not always brilliant at holding to strict team orders. So Vettel, I reckon the plan was to, and also bear in mind you could use Raikkonen to give Vettel a tow as well. So you could use the DRS system tactically and a tow from Raikkonen to give Vettel an advantage over battling Hamilton. And they probably envisaged someone like Verstappen fighting with Hamilton as well. So if everything planned out the way I reckon Ferrari thought it would, you would have a fast Ferrari in front, a equally fast Ferrari behind getting the tow from Vettel, battling with Hamilton, who himself is battling someone like Verstappen, so that's slowing Hamilton down. So what you get at the end there is you get a 1-2 for Ferrari, Hamilton who's third, so Vettel's still in front, and there you go, nice and easy. And then you can use the pit stops to your advantage. Bear in mind Raikkonen was so much quicker. So I think it was unfair to completely blame Ferrari for what happened, because at the end of the day, if Vettel can't deal with being overtaken, because he could have thought, right, hold on a minute, I'm going to lose this battle here, let him pass, and I'll take him somewhere else. I know Monza. Bear in mind that's the testing ground, and I know where this car can go past, and I'll get him there, or we'll undercut him, or something like that. But no, he battled stupidly and lost, and then started blaming everyone else for it. And you can't do that as a driver, and I just think it's so silly. So yeah, I think it's a complicated system, and I think it went wrong for Ferrari because of Vettel, not the other way around.
So you're saying it's ultimately all Vettel's fault then?
I'd say it's the Hamilton-Vettel fault, yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
It's just an unfortunate racing incident that threw off the plan.
Okay, so moving on to Singapore, qualifying finished Hamilton in first, Verstappen in second and Vettel in third, and it finished exactly the same. We're going to talk now about an incident which happened lower down the order. So Sergio Perez was in the walls again, driving into Sirotkin after getting alongside him between turns 17 and 18, following many laps being held up behind the Williams and earning himself a drive-through penalty. With Perez only receiving a drive-through penalty for violent conduct, where he drove into Sergei Sirotkin and refusing to comply with blue flags. However, conversely, you had Romain Grosjean receiving a 5-second penalty for only one of these violations. Do you think Perez got away lightly here?
Ooh, I'd say the drive-through penalty is the second most severe, well, actually the third most severe punishment you can get in a race. It's only behind a 10-second stop-and-go penalty where you have to go into the box, the pits, and stop for 10 seconds with no work on the car and then trundle out again, and disqualification, of course. So I'd say the penalty was fair, but at the same time, you also had Perez. He had a bit of a weird race. He crashed with Ocon at the very start, his teammate, on the very first lap, going around turn 3. Nothing's really happening, and then he thought he had more room than he did, which you'd think would be excusable, but in reality, it was really, really reckless of him, especially also because at the start of the race, it's his teammates. The team principal before the race would have been saying, "Oh, let's get round in one piece because there's a good chance to get some good points today because they had a fast car. They had probably the 4th fastest car, so could have got 7th and 8th or something like that." And also with those two having history with crashing in the past, it's safe to say they're not scared to go up against each other despite being on the same team. But they still didn't. Well, Perez, at least, in my opinion, didn't think there's precautions at all. Ocon definitely was cautious. You see on the replay, he's starting to lift off when he realises that Perez might end up colliding with him. But Perez just kept on going and ended up crashing his teammate into the wall, which is, there's the one golden rule in Formula 1 is don't crash into your teammate. You can be as competitive as you want with him, but if you crash into your teammate, that could take yourself out. It could take both of you out. It could ruin a race for a team. The stakes for a team like Force India, especially since a few races earlier they had gone bankrupt and had to re-enter as a new business entity. Points for them even more crucial, because they'd re-entered, gone back to the bottom of the Constructors' Championship, started on 0 despite having gained about 50 or 60 points beforehand, or even more possibly. So they're starting from scratch, and points for them were at a premium. So Perez clearly didn't think about this. He was ridiculously reckless. In the actual race itself, the drive-through penalty was a fair punishment, I think. But in terms of the actual stakes going on outside the track, you'd like to think the Force India management spoke to Perez, had a word with him, and said, "Mate, what are you doing here? The amount of points we need to get to catch up to the teams who have a head start on us, that would make the kind of collisions, should I say, that he had inexcusable." So you'd like to think that whilst the penalty on track was fair, that Force India definitely had a word with him and made him cut out his reckless nature.
Well, yeah, I don't really have any more to add than that, to be honest. It was. Look, if two drivers do similar incidents, and one does an extra and you stop on it, you'd think that they get a more extreme penalty.
Logically, yeah.
And it was odd that this didn't happen. In fact, as I said earlier, you either have to be really strict with one or lenient on both. You strict on the person who's done the worst, and that's the thing, and that's just odd. I mean, this was a really boring race. Like, the most interesting thing was watching the transition from sunset to darkness, as it is with Singapore and all of this. I think there's fireworks at the end sometimes as well. That's pretty. And so yeah, that's all I really have to say on that. It was one odd incident to have as well. It's just everything about that race was a bit dull, apart from that little incident. So I think the FIA had to get their act together after that a little bit, especially after they did actually relatively well with the sort of how they dealt with incidents before that as well. They were pretty good over it. There wasn't many instances I thought, oh, that's unfair or something like that. This was one of those weird instances where I was like, I'm not sure they're on the same. I think the people who gave the FIA weren't necessarily on the same page with each other when it came to giving the penalties over this one.
For me, this opens up a whole new question about Sergio Perez and the sort of psychology of the guy. So we can remember Sorokin was in front, and Perez is on the microphone complaining, saying, "Yeah, I can't get past him. I can't get past him. He's too slow. He's too slow." Well, logically, if he was too slow, why don't you overtake the guy?
Yeah,
and
secondly,
he then moves across. I believe they were level, and the guy you saw from the onboard camera just turns into him. This is not a sort of whoops, slight contact. This is a full-on jerk to the left, drove into the guy. And for me, this does open up a question not only about his ability but his professionalism. We've never seen, or I've never seen, in sort of very modern contemporary F1, a driver do this before. Do you think this is a characteristic of him, or do you think this is just something that I'm blowing out of proportions?
Oh, I think it's actually a symptom of young drivers. And I think we've seen stuff like that before in people like Verstappen, who is ultra competitive, which is a good thing in Formula One. But there's no sense of, I don't know. There's no sense of actually. I don't think this is the right thing to do. There's no common sense sometimes that prevails. And you're right. He did deliberately turn in, and what it shows you is he's immature. I don't think you would catch, perhaps people like Hamilton doing that. I think they would defend it, and I don't think they would turn in. And I might be wrong there, but yeah, you're right. If he's that much slower, then he should be able to overtake. And you can't. And in Singapore, there are overtaking opportunities. It's not like Monaco, where I could accept that actually being team orders are necessary in Monaco. Let him pass now. Singapore, there are opportunities. There are straights to overtake, and actually he wasn't that much faster. It was just naivety. And pure confidence to the nth degree, and as a result, you get the situation where he realizes he's on the back foot, and he turns in, takes teammate out, and that's just going to do nothing for your career. And there are that's the problem with these young drivers, is they don't have, I don't know, there's nothing. I like the fact that some F1 drivers, David Coulthard for example, is one of my favourite ones. And Jenson Button is one of my favourite drivers, and Jenson Button, even more than David Coulthard, had that element of a nice guy, of a bit humble at the end of the day. Yeah. And he's a great driver, but he also had the common sense to go, do you know, this isn't worth it.
He's very gentlemanly, I find.
This isn't worth it. This bit isn't. There'll be other opportunities, and that's what makes a great driver in reality. And this is why, people like Mercedes look at people like Bottas to be their drivers, because I call him a brown trouser, beige trouser, a beige trouser driver, and fine, he is a beige trouser driver, but what he doesn't do is turn into his teammates and take them out.
Exactly, and for a small team like Force India or Racing Point, or whatever they're called these days, they can't really be throwing the cars away with chances for points to be got. Okay, so moving on to Russia, qualifying was the beige trousered Bottas in first, then Hamilton in second.
What are we going to call it? Can we call him now?
Yeah, go for it. So the results changed, however. Hamilton was in first, the beige man in second, and Vettel in third. In this race,
Boundary beige trousered Bottas.
It does have a nice ring to it, to be fair, doesn't it? In this race, we saw Ricciardo and Verstappen climbing from 18th and 19th to 5th and 6th behind the two Mercedes and Ferraris. This opens up a big question. Do you think this shows there's an unbridgeable divide between the big three and the rest? And what feasibly can be done to close this divide in the short and medium term?
Oh, well, yeah. Big divide. Big divide. So this race, you had the top five were separated by 30 seconds, which is not a big gap, you know. It's quite standard for the top five. You had Ricciardo in sixth, who started from the back due to engine penalties, came 1 minute and 20 off Hamilton, who was the winner. And then the next up was seventh, Charles Leclerc, who was 1 minute and 38 seconds off Hamilton. If you take into account Ricciardo had some problems in that race, so finishing only 20 seconds in front of Leclerc is not representative. So if you take that into account, Leclerc finished over a minute behind the car in front, which would effectively be Verstappen, or at least the healthiest car in front. So yeah, there is a massive divide. Everyone else in the race finished either a lap or 2 laps down. Part of it boils down to funding, to be honest. Mercedes and Red Bull are their Formula One teams come from big corporations who've put massive stacks of money into funding a Formula One team. Whilst you've got Ferrari, who of course is a similar thing. They've been in the sport for ages. Ferrari has certainly helped, but also there's this thing where, depending on your team's like, I guess, value and history, you get basically a payment at the start of the year. So Ferrari, for their history, the fact they've been in Formula One since its inception in 1950, they get a certain sum of money, not a small amount of money, to just for their history, you know, almost to sort of keep them happy, keep them in the sport. So again, that definitely contributes to the amount of funding they get. Whilst you have teams further down the order, you've got Sauber, you've got Force India / Racing Points, you've got Williams, privateer teams who don't have the backing of big corporations, so their funding is much more limited than their provisions for funding are much more limited than some of the money that some of the top teams can get. So and when you see the gaps in the races, like in races, quite often the top 6, if they're in the first 6 places, they will pull away. They'll have a nice battle amongst themselves, which will make for a good race. But from 7th to 20th down, they'll fall back so quick. It's actually quite sad to see, I'd say, because I remember starting to watch Formula One the days where I remember 2009 was one of the first years I watched, and you had 10 teams who were quite evenly matched, lots of teams on the podium, lots of close races. The order would change quite often. Whilst now you have the top 3 teams sort of go off on their own, the first 6 places, and admittedly behind that, the 7th to 20th, the other 7 teams, you do have big great scraps to get into the points. But I'd much rather see those teams in the thick of the action up the front. I'd love to see like a Force India or a Haas or a Sauber or a Renault or something like that just nick a podium sometime. You get some examples like Perez in Azerbaijan nicking a podium, but that was the only time this year or in 2018 that a driver not from Mercedes, Ferrari or Red Bull got a place on the podium. I'd love to see that happen more often. In terms of what can be done in the future, I think at the end of the day it comes down to big regulation changes. We got one coming in 2021 with big changes to the engines and also to the aerodynamics. And at the end of the day, you've just got to hope that those big mix-ups of the rules change things. In 2014, when the V6 engines were brought in, you had the order changing. Admittedly, Mercedes went very far ahead, but behind that you had Red Bull falling back, Ferrari having a shocking year, Force India and Williams coming back to the fore, having been 8th in the previous year. They came 3rd in 2014. But as time goes on, once new regulations are sort of set in stone for a few years, the order seems to settle out, and the gaps you have right now, or that exist right now, become sort of a formality. So I can't see too much changing before 2021. I'd love to see some change. I'd love to see those smaller teams do really well or grab a win or something like that. But I think at the end of the day, you've just got to hope that maybe circumstances go in their favour. But to be honest, you're going to have to wait for the new. It's going to end up being a wait for the new regulations, because that in the end is what mixes up the order. So unless you suddenly decide to give the small teams stack loads of money, then the only change that can be really done is keeping on mixing things up and changing the regulations.
Yeah, there's always going to be a divide, isn't there? And we hope, God, it'd be really nice to see Williams do all right for once, and that hopefully these new, hopefully there'll be a couple of new changes on the car this year that will make their car faster. Bear in mind their car in 2018 was slower than the car in 2017 with their upgrades, so take from that what you will. So there is research and development going on in the lower teams, and Williams is a good example of that. They've done research and development and accidentally made their car rubbish, and it does happen. And yes, you do have Ferrari and Mercedes absolutely dominating the pack. I mean, you also got Red Bull do it an odd one actually. I don't know the ins and outs of how much they get compared to the rest, but it's not an inconsiderable amount of money. But they also use it very wisely. So that's interesting. And also McLaren as well is another one of those teams that have lots of money, but also don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah.
In the previous few years, they've been abysmal. Blaming Honda for their troubles, and then putting a Renault engine in their car and realizing the chassis is not great either. So it sort of confirmed what many of us suspected, that McLaren were sort of using Honda as a scapegoat and not realizing that the actual problem with their whole system is complex. It's not just one. So it'd be nice if other teams got money as well. Especially the one that annoys me the most actually is not necessarily research and development, but the engine systems at the moment. If you look at all the teams that have engines from Mercedes or engines from Ferrari, you'll see that they dominate the pack. And now we have Renault and Honda. That's brilliant. Hopefully more and more teams will adopt the new engines. However, go back 2 years ago, you would have seen that Mercedes and Ferrari were giving 2-year-old engines to like Sauber and stuff, because they were charging obscene amounts of money. And the FIA have actually said that if there's a situation where no team can get an engine because the suppliers refuse to supply them, because why is Mercedes going to supply Red Bull with an engine? Then they will step in and they can actually force a manufacturer to give them an engine. Otherwise, the manufacturing team gets refused entry to F1. So if for some reason Mercedes was the only F1 engine supplier or power unit supplier, and they said, nope, we're not going to move on to Red Bull, FIA could basically twist their arm and make them, which is a good thing. But it does show you that there is a level of control that the big teams have that no other team has. I mean, you couldn't imagine like Racing Point doing that.
No.
And so it's annoying really that there is so much difference between the top team and the bottom teams, and money is a massive issue. I mean, money is an issue in F1 from the teams to the average viewer. I've ranted multiple times about the horrendous deals that have screwed over the consumers. I mean, this year the only live race we can watch unless you pay an obscene amount of money to Sky is the British F1. Now we have on Channel 4 you can watch the highlights. That's all right. And also F1 TV has been, thanks to this deal that Bernie Ecclestone did, F1 TV isn't allowed. So or the full version isn't allowed in the UK either. So that's the problem. There's money, there's backhand money, there's dark money, and I think a lot of it came from sort of Bernie Ecclestone's running of F1, and I don't mean to use him as a scapegoat, but he did do some horrendous deals. And now new managers are sort of having to undo these deals and wait till 2024 when many of them expire to change the rules. And so I hope that the more money will be given, and rightly so, to the lower teams, and also to the racetracks as well. There's something to be said about the racetracks. Where I don't know if there's confirmation yet if Silverstone will actually have a race there this year next year, because of the obscene amount of money they want from them, because again, another deal that happened under Bernie Ecclestone. So the money is a contentious issue in F1. There is too much of it flowing around to the wrong places, and someone's got to actually go, hold on a minute, we got to give money to Renault, we've got to give money to Haas and Alfa Romeo, because otherwise what's the point of them competing? And that's the thing, it's not about necessarily the money, it's about being the best car, and that's all they are. These are car manufacturers, and being the best.
Yep, fair point, well made. So that concludes episode 4 of F1 in Review. We've talked about a number of different things, from racing to the paddock, all the way to the financing of the very sport itself. The next episode, episode 5, will be the last one of F1 in Review, because we will be looking at the last 5 races, funnily enough, with Japan, USA, Mexico, Brazil, and Abu Dhabi. But thank you very much, Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallagher, for joining me today and discussing F1 and this portion of the season. My name's been Tom Claiborne, and thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next episode.